Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Steve Embry, how are you this morning?
I'm great, Ted. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. I appreciate you joining the conversation this morning. You and I had a little bit of back and forth on LinkedIn. I saw an article that you had written called Mind the Gap, that I had a lot of similar observations to some of the conclusions that you outlined in there. So I wanted to chat through your findings and your thoughts on that. But before we do, why don't we introduce you? I know that you were a longtime practicing attorney at Frost Brown Todd, which is a great InfoDash customer. We have a great relationship with that firm. And now you are publisher of TechLaw Crossroads. But
Indeed.
why don't you
I am indeed.
tell us a little bit about what you do and where you do it.
Well, as you say, I practiced with Frost for, a lot of years, even before it was Frost and it was something else. But I left probably in 2017. I was a litigator, mass tort litigator, obviously on the defense side. Um, and I didn't leave because I was dissatisfied. I had begun writing a blog at that point in time and was doing a lot of sort of technology, legal tech kind of related things. And finally decided that I was enjoying that a lot more than I was enjoying practicing law, and was fortunately at a point in my career where I was able to make a pivot. And since then, I've been writing the blog TechLaw Crossroads, which is mainly about legal technology and legal innovation and things of that sort. I also just coming off a year as the chair of the ABA Law Practice Division, which deals a lot with technology. It's one of the four pillars, innovation being one of the other ones. Um, and here I am, and I get to be on podcasts with people like you, and give presentations every now and then, and sort of really enjoy what I do.
Well, that's good stuff. Yeah, it's important to do that, to enjoy what you do. And I enjoy. I've read a lot of your writing, and like I said, there was one article that really stood out to me. You started off with a quote from Mark Twain about there being three kinds of lies: lies,
Right.
damn lies, and statistics, which is hilarious, especially to me.
Yeah.
I have an undergrad degree in mathematics. I was going to be an actuary, and step back from that idea because this was early '90s when I went to undergrad, and the bar was really high, and I thought I was good at math until I got in, some of these more advanced calculus and statistics classes with people who were really good at math, and they were next level. So
I,
I
re-
pivoted.
I remember years ago, Ted, I took the deposition of an actuary in a major insurance coverage kind of case, and we got to the end. It was a 2-day deposition, and we got to the end of it, and the court reporter looked at me and she said, I've never been in a deposition where I didn't understand one thing that the witness was talking about. I said, I'm not sure I did either, but
Yeah, those I don't. When I look back, I think that I gravitated towards statistics. I enjoyed it, but I don't know, doing it 40, 50, 60 hours a week for decades. I'm kind of glad I pivoted, because I like people too much, and a lot of those guys really like to keep the blinders on and stay focused, heads down. Um, but that quote kind of set the stage for some of the anecdotal observations that you had, which align perfectly with the observations that I've had in the law firm world, especially. We don't do much on the inside practice side. But tell us a little bit about the article and some of the conclusions that you drew in
Sure.
it.
I had read several surveys that various organizations had done, and to be honest, most of them were vendor surveys. Um, and the thrust of the conclusions from most of those surveys was that the generative AI tools are being readily adopted, widespread, and being adopted on a widespread basis within law firms, and that the world was changing right before our eyes, and so on and so forth. But then when I began asking lawyers in presentations or even just at conferences, and I go to a lot of conferences, uh, how much they were using these tools, there seemed to be a disconnect because I would ask in a presentation, how many of you are regularly using generative AI tools? And maybe one or two people out of 100 would raise their hands. And it occurred to me as I was seeing this and in talking to other people who had been giving presentations. I'm on a uh, legal tech journalist roundtable every Friday, and this has come up from time to time. Other people that are in the presentation realm have seen sort of the same thing. And then back in July, I gave a presentation with Dr. Maura Grossman out of Canada, who's, as you probably know, is very attuned, and her observation was that the lawyers that say they are using these tools really aren't using them. I don't quite understand what they're using, and many of them are just sort of blithely saying, "Oh, yeah, I use it all the time," and when they really don't. And so you put those two together, and my conclusion sort of was that we're, we're some of the vendors, perhaps out of self-interest and perhaps because of just general bias in the way surveys can be done, we're overstating the how much these tools are being used within law firms. Um, this was I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago to a group of legal aid attorneys, and it would stand to reason of any group. These guys would really really should, and would want to adopt generative AI tools because so much of what they do is they need background information, or they can do it with forms, and they're all overwhelmed. I mean, we all know that how that works. They but you have to qualify financially, and then the number of matters that they can handle are limited by category. But even after that, there's a wide group that they just out of triage they don't able to take. But yeah, when I asked that group, how many of you are using generative AI, two people raised their hands, probably 150 in the room. And then when I asked, well, what are you using it for? Out of the two, one of them said, well, I use it to plan my vacation itineraries. And which is it's a pretty good tool for that. I don't fault him. And the other woman was in fact using it substantively, if you will. But so that's again, that's kind of consistent with the other anecdotal observations that I've seen, and that doesn't surprise me, given how lawyers sort of operate. Um, and as I said, I don't necessarily I don't think the vendors are being disingenuous with these surveys, but as most people know, how you ask the question often will impact the results that you get. That's one factor, and then two, these are sort of self-selecting surveys. So somebody that probably has an interest, like me or you, we would say, "Oh, it's an interesting survey. I'll fill it out," and of course, you would get a different sense than if you tied 500 lawyers together in a room and made them fill out a survey, which probably was never going to happen. But so there is that kind of bias with these surveys, and that's perhaps understandable. It's a long way of answering. I think I answered the question, but it was a long way around the bush. I realize.
No, so couple of things. First of all, yeah, that was a great summary. I don't know if there's a really new development just this week. Have you seen the ILTA tech survey that just came out. I think it came out on Monday.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I haven't dug deep into it. Um,
So I haven't either, but I have skimmed it and I've read a couple of summaries. Doug Austin just did one, and he did a good job pulling out a statistic that I think is going to be really relevant for part of this conversation. And the question in the ILTA survey was, is your firm using generative AI tools, and then in parentheses, ChatGPT, DALL-E, Harvey, etc., for business tasks? They asked this question last year as well. Last year, 15% of respondents said yes. That's 2023. That's 2024, 37% said yes. So, by definition, that would exclude, answers, yes answers to, I use it to plan my vacation.
right.
So I find this to be extremely optimistic and hard to believe. So I don't,
Well, and again, it's how you ask the question. I mean, if I were asked that question, is my law firm using these tools for business? Uh, I would think out of back office tasks,
right.
like the
Business of
business
law.
of prep, which to me is uh, a different use case and poses different issues. And it's easier to adopt that for a whole lot of reasons for business purposes, because one, you're not gambling with your clients, life or fortune or money or what have you. You're basically gambling with your own. And two, um, a lot of that is run by not by lawyers, but by back office people, IT people, for example, but people that are maybe a little bit more savvy on how to use it. And I've joked often that we people say that lawyers are slow adopters of technology in general, and my response is, when it comes to non-billable tasks that make you money, we're not so slow. When it comes to adopting technology that reduces how many hours we can bill, we are a little more cautious. So, there may be part of that too. I don't know. I've not dug into the ILTA study. I know that their studies are really pretty well done for the most part, but I do wonder about the business use and how people interpreted that.
Yeah, I agree that there are some different ways to interpret that. Side note: I'm a big advocate of deploying generative AI for business of law use cases as a first step towards rolling out a more broad Gen AI strategy. I think it's much lower risk, and it's much more controllable. You get one shot generally with busy attorneys, and if things don't go well, getting a second shot becomes more difficult.
Right. Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
and the things don't go well as pretty quick to conclude that.
right? Yes, like seconds.
Right. It,
But
it better write the War and Peace brief that you need in a multi-billion dollar case perfectly, or it's absolutely no value.
yeah, it's garbage. Well,
Yeah.
so and I would agree with you on the way that they frame this, especially considering like Dally. Like Dally is for practice of law has I can't think of a scenario where that would be useful, but it also said Harvey in there. So I think this
Right.
question could have been asked differently and probably put a finer point on it. But nonetheless, what I do find interesting is the bigger. This is the exact opposite of what I would have anticipated. The bigger the firm, the it's drastically higher that the odds are that their answer is yes. So
Right.
for 700 lawyers or more, 74% said yes. For looks like 350 to 765 said yes. All the way at the bottom, under 50 lawyers, only 20% said yes.
Right.
I would have thought it would be the exact opposite, just because on the smaller law side of the world, I see quicker adopt. Like cloud's a great example.
Hmm.
Cloud adoption,
Right.
small law firms did it first, and they did it out of necessity. So I would have anticipated this being kind of reversed. I don't know. What's your take on that distribution?
That distribution really doesn't surprise me. Um, first of all, these tools aren't cheap for the most part, other than the free tools. But if you're talking about something that you're going to use for back office tasks, you're not talking so much about Chat GPT. You're talking about a closed system, and those systems aren't cheap. And it's a lot easier for a 750 person firm to roll that out because when you spread the costs over everybody, uh, all the partners, it's not that much. When you get to a 50-person firm, it does hurt a little bit. Plus, those firms have more sophisticated IT departments and people who can help navigate through that. So it really that it doesn't particularly surprise me. It's a little disappointing in a sense because it suggests that the gap between what big firms, really big firms can do and how they can handle cases and how they can be more profitable and how their lawyers can be more efficient and all that is growing between what the big firms have and can do and what the smaller firms can do. And it's that's troubling for a whole lot of reasons, and disappointing for a whole lot of reasons, because I hate to see that gap get worse than what it is. I mean, it's yeah, as these tools can reduce costs of what big firms conceivably can charge, could easily turn into the more work migrating to larger firms and less to smaller firms, which has a lot of repercussions in a lot of ways in the legal marketplace. So to answer your question, no, it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but it does concern me a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. 74% seems super high to me. And I think that's those are some optimistic answers there. But what sort of, anecdotal observations, like I can tell you the ones that I've had and how I've had them, how I've had access. We over the years between the predecessor company to InfoDash and InfoDash itself, we've worked with about 110 AM law firms. That number is actually probably higher now. Some of those firms no longer exist; they merged, and
Right.
but over the years, that's about the number. And we typically work with KM and innovation teams, and they seem to be the ones leading the charge with Gen AI. And so
Right.
I get a lot of conversations with CKOs, CKIOs, and chief innovation officers, and the feedback I've gotten is there's lots of experimentation, but not a lot of on the practice of law side, and there's very little actually production workflow going on in the Gen AI space. What have your observations looked like?
Um, you know, Basically the same. I was thinking as you were talking with the really large firms, there's probably a lot more buzz about generative AI within the firm, because they're all sort of jazzed about, we need to do this for our clients, we need to be on top of this, we need to be in the cutting edge. As you work your way down the size of the law firms, I mean, I talk to a lot of lawyers in small to mid-sized firms, and they're to be blunt, they don't have the time or the energy to investigate generative AI. They're too busy trying to keep their heads above water and keep the doors open. Um, so I think, particularly when you start talking about surveys, if you're in a firm that's all the buzz has been about generative AI, you've been to 10 partners meetings and it always comes up that we got to get on top of this. We're going to appoint an AI director and blah, blah, blah. Then, you're more apt to respond to a survey in a different way than if you're in a 50, 25 person law firm that, you know, have to spend your whole day putting out fires and you're likely to say, I have no clue what this generative AI stuff is, and I don't have time to figure it out. I got to get stuff done. Uh, And so I think that that's part of it. So I don't know. I missed sort of part of your question there at the beginning, but I don't know if I answered it or not.
Yeah, no, that answer makes sense. What about the last time you and I had spoken? You had some interesting use cases mapped out, and you
Right,
talked about like generating questions for
right.
depositions and client interviews. Like, to talk a little bit about some of the use cases you think are available and
Sure.
accessible today.
Yeah, and I always tell people when we get into this area, if you're as a lawyer in a law firm, you need to think carefully what you want to do with the tools, um, because you can be a little confused into thinking that the only way to use these tools is to sign up with one of the vendors and pay an exorbitant per user on an exorbitant per user basis. Maybe not exorbitant, but expensive. There's a lot of uses of the public tools, though, that that can be made as long as you're, of course, careful and you don't, spill your client's secrets and you understand the risks and you understand hallucinations and inaccuracies and all of that. So, having said all that, I've seen a number of lawyers do things like uh, my client's deposition is going to be taken next week in a distracted driver case, and my client was driving a car that allegedly, the driver of which was allegedly distracted. What questions can I expect the plaintiff's lawyer to ask in that deposition? And give me 100 such questions, and it will give you 100 questions. Many of those, if you're an experienced lawyer, you would say, "I know that, I know that, I know that." But there might be 10 you would say, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That could be a good question." And I've also seen it sort of combined with uh, there's a theory that that plaintiffs' lawyers often use called the reptile theory, which is basically trying to plant fear and loathing within jurors' minds about uh, protecting the world against what an evil corporation may be doing. And I know I sound a little jaundiced because I was, after all, a defense lawyer 30 years. So, but you can ask. I've seen lawyers ask, plug into this. The plaintiff, the lawyer for the plaintiff, is a well-known adopter of the reptile theory. How does that change the questions that could be asked? And it will again understand that prompt with more facts, of course, and give a pretty good answer, at least to start. And I think when we talked before, I can remember when I was a younger lawyer, particularly preparing for depositions, wanting to say, I want to make sure I get all the questions. So I don't want to miss any questions that I perhaps should ask or could ask. And you could spend hours trying to brainstorm to make sure that was correct, or bug senior lawyers with questions. And, that's which is a catch as catch can. I would have loved a tool like this to be able to get that sort of brainstormed list to help me be as thorough as possible. And I mean, I say when I was a younger lawyer, even more experienced lawyers can do that. And there's a number of things I've seen a lawyer ask it, getting ready for a trial in a certain kind of case. What questions should I ask jurors and voir dire? Um, and it'll give answers. And then I saw the same lawyer then ask, what answers to those questions uh, would suggest a potential bias against my client? And again, it would give a reasonably good answer, um, which is just, you consider the time saving and the confidence building that uh, would generate. Again, especially for younger lawyers, but even for every lawyer. It's quite remarkable in my mind. I know a number of defense lawyers, and one of them remarked to me recently that ever since these tools have come out, the plaintiffs' lawyers that he regularly practices cases against have suddenly gotten a lot better. And and his theory was they've gotten a lot better because they've been using these tools and now know what questions to ask and what to do, and which is kind of a very interesting development, I think.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, there has been a lot of conversation about AI's impact to junior associate training. And in the opposite direction of what you just described, you
Right.
just described ways in which it could help. Ways in which it could hurt is, for years, I don't know if this is your perspective, but I know it's the perspective of many, is that clients have subsidized the training for junior associates. The partners oversee the work, and much of that junior associate time is billed, and some isn't, of course, but that's been the training model. And if some of those more routine tasks can be automated, how is that going to impact the development model for junior associates coming into the industry?
Right. You know, I think I think we as a profession are going to have to rethink our training of younger associates as a result of these tools. It's a lot of law firms. The training is sort of the oh, gain perspective at the with the water cooler conversations. That's where the the training is handed down from on high. You know, I don't know about a lot of other lawyers, but when I was an associate, I went to work. I went and got my coffee. I went in my office. I closed the door. I went to work. Bumping into somebody in the water cooler didn't happen all that often, and when it did, the conversations might well be about the who won the game last night, or what kind of season a team was going to have. Um, and the other sort of phenomenon that I've observed over the years, particularly when there's not a robust training program, is uh, by luck of the draw or by luck of ethnicity, some lawyers get better training than others. And it, unfortunately, I think some of the training deficiencies fell on uh, women and people of color, mainly because, I mean, a lot of lawyers like working with lawyers that look like them, like white men. So, I have seen over the years that the younger white men lawyers get much better training, much better mentorship opportunities than other people, which is unfortunate. But and just like we don't have younger lawyers sitting in warehouses leafing through document after document after document anymore. Uh, we have to look at what we're training, and I mean these tools aren't going to go away, and we can't sort of say, well, we're going to keep doing what we've always done and not adopt these programs that lawyers and younger lawyers are frankly going to use no matter what we do. I think we have to say, okay, what does this mean for training, and how can we train our lawyers, our younger lawyers, uh, given the advantages that these tools make. And an example that I would give is going back to the deposition example. A younger lawyer might sit down and come up with a list of questions and then run a check through ChatGPT to see what he or she missed. And then the next thing that would happen is the younger lawyer would go to the senior lawyer's office and say, here's the questions I'm thinking about asking in the deposition. And the senior lawyer would say, that's good, that's good, that good. That question's a little iffy, doesn't really apply. And in the course of, an hour, there could be a pretty robust training session if we begin to look at things that way, as opposed to, let's try to keep doing what we're doing and ignore reality here. So is it going to change training? Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it should. Um, the thing that I worry actually more about, Ted, is not so much the training, but uh, sort of the temptation for senior lawyers to use these tools themselves and replace the work that junior lawyers were doing by doing it themselves. And here's what I mean by that. I mean, when you're uh, a senior lawyer and you get a client in a litigation matter, you get to know the client, you sit down with the client, you discuss the case, you evaluate the exposure. Over the course of several hours or several days, you walk away with a really grounded familiarity with that case and the client, and you understand, or you should understand, what the client's real interests are and what should or should not be done. Armed with that knowledge, you may be now in the best position to construct the prompts that pulls out the information for a deposition, for example, or to defend a deposition, or to protect the client, or to brainstorm strategies, all those sorts of things that in the past, when I had big cases, we would have meetings, and younger lawyers would come in, and we'd talk about things like that, and we'd give them tasks to do, and they'd go do them. Uh, I wonder if the temptation's going to be to for senior lawyers to do more, um, and there'll be less need of the junior lawyers and less need to train them. I think that's a more greater danger. Um, and that of course immediately leads you into, well, what does that mean for the business model of law firms, which is based in part on billable hours, as many people have talked about, tried to drive a stake in for years unsuccessfully, and the leverage model. And the leverage model, probably much more than the billable hour model, the leverage model has resulted in the increased wealth and profitability of law firms for the last 30 years. Where you have one lawyer who gets the business and six lawyers that are younger than him work on the case, and instead of 100 hours billed, who at 600 hours, and it's a very successful and very profitable model where you don't have to have those six associates, and you can do it with one. You know, either you have to do more work to maintain the same level of profitability, or you have to increase your rates to get there. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. I think that remains to be seen how these tools are going to impact those models.
Yeah, I had a debate. I got a good friend of mine who owns a 50 attorney law firm here in St. Louis, and his position is that ChatGPT is not going to impact the leverage ratios, and I'm like, it has to. It's math, right? If
Right.
you have unless you have an unlimited pipeline of work, and you and I might have chatted about this last time. I realize that there is a whole universe of unserved needs in the legal world, but does that align to the type of expertise and practices that you've built in your firm and the size clients, and do you have relationships with those people? Nobody has an unlimited pipeline. I don't care how much work is out there in the universe. You have filtering criteria that limits what is really viable for your law firm.
Right.
So it has to impact leverage, but
Well, and the question is maybe, in what kind of law firm will it impact leverage? Um, a plaintiff's law firm working on a contingency fee basis would look at these tools, and are looking at these tools completely differently than than a giant firm. A giant firm, the Cravaths of the world, the kind of litigation matters that those firms get. I don't want to say cost is no object, but it's cost versus the exposure of the case means that no stone left unturned. And will the leverage model be impacted? Maybe not so much. But as you work your way down the chain, there are smaller firms that don't have those kinds of cases, but yet have significant cases, um, where the leverage model might enable them to I mean, I thought just the ability to use these tools to lower costs, perhaps not as many hours, might result in the savvy ones getting more work. I recently wrote an article about the insurance defense industry, and I was trying to make this point that Jevons paradox, which is applicable, in the product world. I mean, you lower the cost of the product, uh, more people will buy it, right? I mean, it's like I don't know, you can get any number of examples. A television set, a high definition TV, the price goes down, you sell more TVs, you make more money. And in the insurance defense industry, will that hold true? In other words, if there are firms that can lower their costs, where whereby insurance companies will send them more work that maybe they weren't getting before because their cost structure was in excess of what the exposure of the case, they could end up with much more work and be much more profitable, even though they're not necessarily leveraging the cases like they once were. It's an interesting time in the profession, I think. A lot of things are going to fall out here over the next few years maybe, but maybe not. Your debate partner may be correct. I mean, it may be that it's the demise of the billable hour has been predicted ever since I've been practicing law, and it doesn't seem to be impacted too significantly so far.
Yeah, well, I think you could make an argument that there it could be, increase, decrease, but it's going to have an impact, right? It's just that if when the way in which you deliver work impacts you know the segregation of duties in that supply chain, there will
Right.
be impact to headcount, to organizational structure, and that ultimately impacts leverage. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't disagree at all. Then in some cases it could increase, some cases it can decrease. And the paradox that you described there, assuming elastic demand, right?
Yeah.
Yes, lowering costs has an increasing impact on demand. Um,
And I think it's important too to to not view the amount of legal work as sort of a zero sum game. You carve out 10% of the legal work that's not going to be done by lawyers, and there's only 90% left. That that may be true sometimes, but it's not always true. And in fact, I was at a conference last week, and it was it was a relativity and e-discovery provider. And one of the points that was made in a presentation that I had not thought about is all these people writing all these prompts and getting all these responses back from Chat GPT or Claude or Perplexity or what have you. That in and of itself has created a new amount of data for e-discovery. Of- so now we have a tool that on the one hand has reduced the amount of lawyer time to complete the task, but on the other hand, it's created much more data that now has to be evaluated. So it's not necessarily it can't necessarily say, oh well, these tools are going to reduce the amount of legal work because they in and of themselves could create more.
yeah, another variable is what legal work is can and will be paid for, right? Yes,
Yeah,
there are huge unmet needs out there, but not all legal work that will be paid for. A good example, I was talking to the folks from Gunderson Detmer yesterday, and they were talking about how they use AI and we're going to do a podcast on this, so not to spoil it, but how they use AI for separate low risk separation
right,
matters and offer letters. And you know the reality is, like, especially in the startup world, which is where they focus, that's nobody's going to pay for an offer letter from a law firm, right? Or very
right,
few, right?
right,
It's but if somebody's offering it for free, absolutely. And you're going to do a much better job as a labor and employment attorney than I am as a CEO trying to take off my CEO hat, put on my
right.
HR hat.
And I
So
think
that's another variable.
some of the more far forward thinking law firms, particularly in that space, are starting to adapt much more of a venture capitalist mentality. In other words, let's help all these startups and not charge them, and we'll probably lose money on 90% of them. But it only takes one scruffy guy walking in with a hoodie named Mark Zuckerberg, and you're going to make $1 gazillion off the legal fees, right? I mean, and I think a lot of law firms are starting to look at it that way, and doing just what you say, Ted, is creating some free tools in the hopes that by doing so they will ultimately get a very good client, and it only takes one or two of those to justify investing a whole lot of money into the bots that will do things like that.
Yeah, I had Annie Dadish from Wilson Sonsini. They have a platform called Neuron. Cooley, I think, has Go
Right.
is their platform. Yeah, it's an interesting model. I I wanted to come back to something that you said that I hadn't thought about, and I find really interesting. Do you think that AI could potentially help level the field a little bit with d- diverse associates in terms of their development because of the
Absolutely. Yeah.
dynamic? Yeah,
Yeah.
that is super
And
interesting. Like,
yeah, it's so. that group often is not as well mentored. I mean, it's a fact of life. It just is not anybody being deliberately racist or anything like that. It's just human nature. Uh, so they might not receive the same level of on-hands mentorship from the partner in the corner office. But now they have tools that can replace some of that and advance them further than they would have gotten if they had nothing, right? So, I mean, if you get 100, if you're a beginning lawyer and you can pull out 100 questions from Chat GPT, 50% of them you haven't thought of, that in and of itself is a training exercise because then you have to sit down and say, oh, and evaluate those questions and say, is that an important question? And why is it an important question? And should I ask that? And, frankly, it would enable a lot of younger lawyers to handle more matters and get real life experience. They could be trusted to take depositions that they might not be trusted to take before because they've got a playbook, if you will. So I think in a whole lot of ways, sort of across the board, it provides opportunities, uh, particularly for those that aren't getting the kind of training, whether that's because the, the, the program is not robust or whether, like in many firms, it doesn't exist at all. Um, and that's, also not to say that it gives opportunities for people coming out of law school to look at different options. I spoke at a class of law students a couple of weeks ago about kind of the subject. And um, when I got out of law school, the notion of opening my own firm it wasn't even a notion. I mean, it was an impossibility. And now yeah, it's a possibility. It's not totally outlandish to think that you can adopt some of these tools and open your own shop or open your own shop with a couple other lawyers or go in with a couple lawyers in a small firm and perform you know high quality or at least acceptable quality legal work. That opportunity wasn't there 10 years ago, and it is there today, in my view. Um, I'm not sure I would advise anybody that that's the best way, but I'm not sure I'd advise somebody coming out of law school that going to a 1,000-person law firm and killing yourself for 5 years is the most healthy way to live your life either.
Yeah, agreed. A lot leave the field. A lot. I see a lot come over to the
Yeah.
vendor side. A lot
Yep.
move into knowledge management, innovation roles. Um, the something else you mentioned that a thought popped up was the context, the client context, setting the stage for the prompting. That seems like a great task for custom GPTs, or what Claude calls projects, where
Right.
you upload training documents. It could be their annual report, or verbiage from their website. Where I've got a friend who owns a marketing company, and he manages the social media presence for dozens of, maybe even hundreds of companies, and that's how he manages it. Is he has custom instructions,
Hmm.
which dictate the output as he's mimicking the communication style of the people that he's helping ghostwrite for, and he uploads their training documents and so he has a custom GPT for every client. That seems like that might be a
Right.
model that might help law firm clients as well.
Yeah. I know there's one vendor that I know that has invested a lot of time in working with real human lawyers to determine when a lawyer asks this question, here is what he or she is most likely after, and then constructs the prompt based on that inputted question, which I think is an interesting way of doing things because it eliminates some of the work needed by the lawyer to construct a prompt. I, I think, we look back 5 years from now, I think the ability of most people to construct viable prompts will be substantially improved. Um, people got used to making doing Google searches. It took them a while. And doing a Google search is a lot different than constructing a prompt. Um, but I have found, and I've heard others that have said the same thing, that the more you use the tools, the more the tool seems to recognize what you're after a little bit better. Um, I primarily use ChatGPT, and I have noticed that the amount of information that I have to give in a prompt yesterday was a lot less than I had to give when I first started. Just kind of an interesting phenomenon. I nobody's really talked about whether that's really true or maybe it's just so we think it's true, but I've heard it from several people. Um, so yeah, I mean it's an interesting world out there that we're moving toward, and I think it's I think as prompts get better and as the machines get better and or the platforms get better in understanding us and what we're really looking for, I think you know, the output is going to be significantly improved.
Yeah. It's I just read an article this week that talked about, I don't know if you saw it. It was in Jeff Brandt's Pinhawk newsletter, which I think is fantastic. I've been a
Right?
subscriber for many years.
Yeah, me too.
And it was about LLMs getting dumber. Um, and that they have no idea why. And they rattle off several theories, one of which is cost cutting is one theory, like the amount of resources necessary to maintain and enhance these
Right,
models is staggering. um, Stale training data, uh, data feeding, the output of chat gpt coming as input as training data, also making them
right.
dumber. There's a whole host of
Well,
theories.
sure, and that's not to mention the fact that these tools are talking to themselves more and more. In other words, the data that they're now looking at, a large piece of that is data that it generated. So
Right.
it's like you're gonna start this kind of loop where you just say the same things because you've said it so many times before. So I don't know. Yeah, I've heard that theory as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, the problem with LLMs and measuring effectiveness and establishing benchmarks is LLMs are not deterministic, and there's not a way to make
Right,
them deterministic at this point. There's a setting called temperature that you can dial down to zero that makes them more predictable in terms of output, but they're still not deterministic even at that point. So I don't know. Just kind of last question for you here.
sure.
What do you see? I've been talking a lot about the Stanford paper for a while because I found it so interesting, and
Hmm.
the findings in that quite jarring, I think, to the market and certainly to the vendors in that space. And it raised a lot of really interesting questions about, we have no common definition even on what a defective response is. The paper
Right,
did a good job of listing out. Um, so I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and we have the concepts of defects and defectives. So a defect is there's a one to many relationship. So your cell phone could have a button that sticks down here. That's a defect, and the screen that's not responsive. That's another defect. Two defects equal this phone is defective. The same thing goes with these responses. It could be you excluded reference information. You gave a partially incomplete response. We don't have a framework, even a conversational framework, to talk about what a defect is, or what is defective. So I don't know. How do you see things playing out with
um,
our
yeah,
ability to measure these systems?
there's a great temptation when we talk about things like this to sort of evaluate these systems in the abstract. So, um, yeah, Chat GPT spit out some information that was not completely accurate and left out a key piece. On the other hand, we all know that if you ask a person to do that same task, you're going to get some level of defect for a whole lot of reasons. Person was tired or they didn't understand the question, which is often, the case. Because lawyers are often not the best communicators when it comes to assigning work to people, even though we're good communicators in telling our clients and jurors and all of that. But so it's the question I think that we really have to ask is, not whether these systems are perfect at every task, but can they at least reach um, an error rate that's equal to or better or less than what humans can do on a particular given task. And then of course you have to ask yourself the related question is, if the human makes a mistake, where's that mistake likely to be and what do I have to do to correct it? Which may be a different thing than asking, if the platform makes a mistake and what do I have to do to correct it? That's a different task, right? I mean, if it's a human, you have to begin, saying, okay, well, how did I talk to the human, and what language did I use, and did I recognize the human's background? If you ask an antitrust lawyer to handle a slip and fall case, you're probably not going to get a great result, right? So there's all those kinds of things, and so yeah, I mean, these things make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. The question is how do we recognize where those mistakes are, and what do we do to overcome them and still get the benefits of the platforms, and the benefits can be significant.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I think there's right now expectations are all over the board, and these tools. I always say we're in the top of the first inning in this baseball game, right? And we really need to manage our expectations. And well, this has been a great conversation.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Tell us, before we wrap up, how do folks find you? How do they find TechLaw Crossroads? Anything else that you want to share?
Well, you just Google TechLaw Crossroads, and it should pop right up. It's a blog. You can subscribe to it. It's free, or I typically will post on LinkedIn whenever I write something and put it on there. If people want to get a hold of me, my email is sembry@techlawcrossroads.com. I'm always happy to respond to inquiries. And so, yeah, I'd welcome the input of anyone, and I certainly always glad to have readers who comment on what I write. So, and
That's
thank you for having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, I've enjoyed talking with you, and I think I've learned a few things, and hope I imparted some things of value to you and your listeners.
Absolutely, you have, and I appreciate your time. We hopefully I'll run into you at a conference here soon, but if not, I'm sure we'll be interacting on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ted.
All right, thanks, Steve. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.